believers, non-believers, unaffiliated believers, sort of believers, and even you think I'm a believers, welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor, a podcast where we welcome converts but where we think like disciples. This is a show where we address things about which today's church is both terrified and silent. If you know me, you know I'm very slow to embrace a conspiracy theory. It's just too hard to pull one off. Too much has to go just right. Too many true blue loyalists are required to keep it all hush-hush, you know? Human nature is selfish. Someone in that conspiratorial ring will be happy to take $3 million to rat out the whole shindig, get rich for the bestseller tell-all book, and blow the whole thing up. No. Fluoride in your toothpaste is not a mind-controlling agent. Yes, NASA really landed on the moon. No, the U.S. government did not orchestrate the 9/11 attacks. Yes, Elvis really died in his bathroom in 1977. No, Billy Buckner was not paid off to let that slow rolling ground ball go through his legs at first base to see the New York Mets win the 1986 World Series.
Wait, that really happened?
But today, 2 full and ugly years into the woo-flu kabuki theater that I'm watching, that is less true for me. 2 years of madness? I'm afraid we are witnessing a full-blown conspiracy, and I never thought I'd say that. Oh boy, let me first make all the required caveats. Yes, there is a virus. No, it cannot be stopped by common face masks. Yes, people do get sick and temporarily lose their sense of taste and smell. No, that's not a reason to cut off all social relationships. Yes, the virus is much harder on folks over 65, and no, that's not an abiding reason for everyone to live in fear. Yes, those with comorbidities do suffer and die more often from the flu-rona. No, that's not a reason to shut down the entire economy. Yes, and we're watching it daily, it is mutating over time. And no, that's not a reason for me or you or the dude named Hugh to sacrifice all our rights as citizens and live in a state-controlled society.
Hey, slow your roll. It's not that big a deal. I got my social credit card when I bought some JD at yon local liquor store.
2 years in and there's still no transparent data from the powers? 2 years in and we're still being told to wear a mask that hasn't helped over the last 4 or 5 iterations? 2 years in and scientific giants like Dr. Peter McCullough and Dr. Robert Malone are everywhere being canceled? Oh, by the way, if you haven't listened to the Joe Rogan interview of Dr. Malone, please do that immediately. I don't care if you stop listening to me right now. You have to hear the feedback from the man who developed the mRNA technology now being used in a couple flu-rona injections. He not only knows all the data, he personally knows all the players. 2 years in and the mandates, which have been repeatedly blocked by federal judiciaries, those mandates are effectively stealing people's relationships, jobs, houses, and futures? Unspeakable. 1 year in and we're now past Joe Biden's campaign promise to crush the virus. Instead, mask up, baby. Go get your 3rd booster, and if you don't have your 1st booster yet, we won't even consider you vaxxed. How can this be? There is a conspiracy at work. Let me explain. Do I believe there was a big convention where the CDC, the FDA, major media executives, congressmen, senators, pharmaceutical executives, the Trump White House, and the Joe Biden White House staff, medical school presidents and department chairs, hospital CEOs, and social media tech lever pullers all gathered together to conspire to screw we the people? Maybe they all met at a cloistered basement somewhere in Cleveland? No, of course not. But is there a shared set of values and goals and pet principles that all those varied parties share in common? Absolutely. And the fixed nature, the now we can see most rigid nature of those values and goals has seen a bamboozle pulled over on the American citizenry like we've never seen in history. If you have enough powerful people driven by the same ideals and focused on the same agenda and committed to the same telos, you'll eventually bear fruit. And holy shnikes, are we ever seeing the fruity results? So, how does this work? Dude, at one level, it's simple sociology. People are social beings. We're influenced by those around us, by those with whom we share the same space, even if that space is in our heads, even if that space is the 2-inch by 3-inch electronic space on our iPhones. The social beings that we are, we crave that they like us, that they attaboy us. And so, if you defy that sociological groupthink, you'll get yourself canceled, fired at your job, ostracized from the insider dinner parties, uninvited to the cool kids wine tasting conflabs. Think of it like this. Did you ever go hunting? Or did you ever hang around hunters? They have certain set ways of doing things. You stow your weapons a certain way, you prepare for the hunt with certain equipment, you set up camp in common to the group's sense ways, you stalk your deer or elk downwind. And if you rolled into a group of hunters and challenged any of that, you'd probably hear some snickers, probably notice some jeering grins. You won't get the first choice cut of meat at the campfire dinner that night. The same is true in the medical and political and social media realms. There are tried and true ways to do things. In the medical world, there are tried and true ways to practice safety, tried and true ways to guard against legal suits, ostensibly tried and true people in the hierarchy to be trusted. And if and you go again one of those, you'll find yourself quickly outed, criticized. And if and you do it for long, you'll lose your job. The medical world is more than ever a mostly bureaucratic realm. And sadly, unfortunately, for the sake of medicine and for the sake of our collective health, the bureaucratic crystallization has shut down the free exchange of practices and ideas and innovations. You know this, but the political world is much the same. True dat with the social media guru universe. Groupthink, mind meld, accepted and understood values and goals. Here at home, I take daily meds for my pre-hypertension blood pressure. High blood pressure runs in my whole family. My yearly prescription is expiring this month. But my family doctor, and this pains me to say it because I really like her friendly and professional office staff, my family doctor won't consider talking with us about therapeutics or early treatment. Like 99% of the family doctors in the nation, their response to our, "Are you able to think innovatively about Flurona?" Those kinds of questions we've asked have been met with, "We're required by our network to only follow CDC guidelines." So, me? That's the end of that relationship. I mean, doctors are about our health. The other day I was phoning offices here in the Spudlandia Valley, and I asked one receptionist, "Hi, yeah, we're looking for a new family doctor." "Wonderful," she responded. "How can I help?" So I said, "Yeah, we need a family doctor who can think independently, treat us as individuals with our individual concerns. So I'm wondering, is your office willing to think critically about the coronavirus? Would you consider with us things like therapeutics or early treatment?" "No," she demurely answered. "We're required to only follow CDC guidelines." "Well, very well," I replied. "I understand. Thank you." And I hung up. What had happened? I had just run into the very groupthink I'm asking you to recognize today, my dear listener. All subgroups are characterized by groupthink. All industries have their "don't you dare go beyond this line of tradition," or "don't you dare challenge accepted wisdom in that area" ways of groupthink mind meld. I was constantly aggravated at the university by the soul-sucking lockstep, "we have to do it just the way every other school is doing it" mentality. And I was constantly saying to the leaders, but if we do it like everyone else, what makes us unique? How can we establish a distinct brand if we're playing by the same set of values as all the other bigger, better funded, more clear about their identity than we are about our identity schools? We're set up to lose. We were set up to be lifeless. Groupthink. And you'll not be surprised, my having routinely pressed up against that cold mind meld eventually saw me have to leave a job I otherwise loved. Mindlessness. How has this worked? With the ever-expanding maw of status control under the guise of a pandemic, how has this worked? Well, here's how the Wall Street Journal editorial staff put it. 2021. Quote, "the year when the conformity that characterizes American politics and media was exposed for its mistakes as never before." By conformity, we mean the progressive political and media consensus that forms quickly around an issue and then reinforces itself no matter the competing arguments or new information. This isn't a conspiracy in any formal sense. There are no Zoom meetings. This is about a shared set of political values and preferences that leads people to reach the same conclusions about an event. The reporters and commentators of the major progressive media, Washington Post, Bloomberg, the Financial Times, the New York Times, the Atlantic, and more, all then reinforce what they now like to call the narrative of a story. Politicians and the press feed the narrative with leaks and the stories they pursue, or, as important, what they don't pursue. Disagreement is rare to non-existent because the cost can be ostracism or lost careers. Recall how James Bennett lost his job as New York Times opinion editor for running an op-ed by GOP Senator Tom Cotton on using the military to control urban riots. Mr. Bennett thought he was merely exposing readers to a different point of view. He was banished for challenging the progressive narrative after George Floyd's murder. End quote. And here with the UU podcast, Facebook, Meta, diminishes or tamps down the availability of anything I post that is critical of the CDC, the federal government, the medical industry. Goodness, I can put up a picture of Goober from freaking Gomer Pyle and 84 people will see it. But if I put up a picture of Prague Squad member Ayanna Pressley having contracted the flurona, even though she's got both the initial vax and a booster, no one. Facebook does not help anyone to readily see that post. Why? Power, money, controlling the narrative.
You're overreacting. We don't block anyone.
Brainwashing the masses through simple repetition. Programming our souls by fear porning us. Ruining relationships. Oh, Jesus, the number of stories in my own extended family about those who won't gather with other family members who haven't been vaxxed or who won't wear a mask at family gatherings. It's utterly been heartbreaking for me. Divide and conquer, baby. Divide and conquer. And Yukit. All my life I've been distrustful of big government. And things have only grown ickier as time rolls on. Today we have unelected, could care less about the economy or your personal rights bureaucrats dictating what meds we must and cannot take. fomenting an increasingly obvious scam ploy on the populace, and I'm more suspicious than ever. They're lying about science. We are being screwed. Oh, Jesus, help us to be innocent doves and cunning serpents. It's time to stand up to rampant evil. Gersh, my monthly Patreon supporters, thank you dearly for helping me heap opprobrium on rampant evil. If you're wired to the frequency of Christ, you'll sense intuitively rampant evils. And those who don't sense those mass-scale rampant evils, we have every right to wonder if they resonate to the frequency of Christ. They may be giving grotesque sin a pass. Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. Lord, have mercy on a nation full of sinners. Hey, you want to help me, but you just cannot give financially? Please just go out and write a review of the show on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook. Thanks much. Last week I referenced John Feinberg's book, The Many Faces of Evil. I'll be citing his work again today in this episode about moral evil, but I thought I'd share a brief reflection that both he and then my daily Bible reading prompted. Feinberg wrote, quote, God works with a remnant in an age. When we read the Bible, we see various people who stood for God against rampant evil. Think, for example, the days of Noah. Wickedness was so widespread that God decided to destroy everyone on earth except Noah and his family. Reading that, I paused. Interesting. I'm used to thinking of the remnant in soteriological ways about who's saved and who is not, or ways that go to what actually constitutes the bride of Christ, the church, or not. But Feinberg made an astute point from Scripture that, quote, God always works with a remnant of people who oppose rampant evil. Then in my morning Bible reading, the lectionary gave me 1 Kings 3, where in a dream, God told Solomon to ask for something, to ask for a gift. And Solomon says, Lord, I'm like a little child in the midst of such a task. So I ask for your wisdom in governing the people. I want an understanding mind, able to discern between good and evil. Chapter 3, verse 9. And God responded to Solomon saying, because you've asked for this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or for the defeat of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern right from wrong, I will indeed give you such wisdom. And God was so happy, he added, I'm so pleased at your request, I'll also give you riches and honor. 1 Kings 3:13. Now, you guys, in my life, that's the way the Holy Spirit often speaks to me, repeatedly, clearly on some theme, and often on some theme that was not on my own mind. We are called, this show is now called, to stand against rampant evil. And the kind of evil that causes more suffering and pain than all the rest on earth combined, moral evil, right? Yes, tsunamis can wipe out a couple 100,000 people in moments, but godless tyrants? They can wipe out 6 million Jews in less than 4 years' time. Godless politicians? They can wipe out 40 to 50, maybe 60 million Russians with starvation in a decade's worth of time. Me? Oh yeah, I believe in the devil and demons and principalities and powers. That's part of the biblical worldview. But most of our suffering, we inflict it on ourselves. Moral evil. Moral evil is defined as willful evils that violate our God-given dignity, or evils freely perpetuated by people against people, freely whether directly or indirectly, or actions and decisions and words and policies that wound other souls, or evils that violate God's character. So then, moral evil cannot be committed by nature. Natural evils, I worked through them last week, are not the same as moral evils. And strangely, the human race has inflicted more evil on itself than all of nature combined has done, and that's by a long shot. So, why? Why won't an all-powerful God stop moral evils? Or why won't God, who is pure love, stop big moral evils if he knows that what's going to happen and what's going to happen and what causes so much suffering? Well, to address questions like that, echoing last week, I'm going to set up John Feinberg's thinking again in The Many Faces of Evil about God's act of creation. Then we'll postulate why God doesn't stop some moral evils. Then I'll explain even where I greatly differ with Feinberg's own theological defense. First, God created finite, non-glorified, erect, emotionally wired, critically brained, conscious, equipped with desires and a conscience beings to walk and dwell on planet Earth. Second, coincidingly, God created a world suitable for finite creatures like us. And third, while the fall really happened, it did not destroy the creation. So while our desiring and our free willing were infected, tainted, poisoned, they were not destroyed, not erased. I tentatively agree with Feinberg that the free will we have is compatibilistic. Now, this is fancy philosophical terminology, but it's not that hard to understand. Compatibilistic means it comes packaged or contextualized by finitude and the physical nature of life on planet Earth and sociology and psychology. Compatibilistic free will says we are free inside the parameters of reality as we have it. Incompatibilistic free will, which Feinberg says is actually the larger camp in the church. Incompatibilistic free will says free will is only free if it is utterly free, free from circumstances, free from physical constraints. And I would even think this way with students in the classroom, I don't think we are that free. I mean, we are embodied beings. We're, we're not free to become dragonflies or change our sex. But within our environs, we are free agents. We still can choose what to do. Scripture is univocal. We still have the free will given by God at creation. Fourth, in creating, God has made important decisions. With regard to human free willing, He can predetermine all of our decisions so that we only think we're making free decisions, or He can let us genuinely make our own decisions. If He secretly puppeteers our decisions, then obviously we do not have free will. And then God has no right to judge us to hell, and the Bible's portrayal is false. But God can't choose both to puppeteer everything and to give us free will. Now, frankly, this goes to an earlier show, number 227, where I repeatedly said God can be in control without being controlling. But still more, if God grants us free will, then we have a certain amount of power that we exercise. And that power, again, is a moral power. And moral power is actually great power. And most of that immediate power is pernicious. It's more broadly enacted through evil than good. Are you with me? Is it easier to do great sweeping good with one's decisions or great sweeping evil? Well, I believe the latter, evil. A teenager could walk into a school library with a rifle and end, or brutalize, the lives of dozens of schoolmates much easier than he could walk into that same library and profoundly bless, across future decades, their lives. Oh my goodness, all of that All of that makes the formation of people, pedagogy, the moral wiring, the character building of kids more important than almost anything. It is a full-blown, rampant evil that our society intentionally has skipped away from the moral wiring of children. We are corroding civilization by abandoning the character of kids. But my point is, our free will is powerful. Our agency to do evil is especially great. Watching bureaucrats here in 2022, the human agency potential to swiftly enact wide-sweeping suffering is immense. Holy God! An acquaintance of mine, let's name him Steve, just told me on Facebook that his wife was recently diagnosed with damage on her liver. It stems from heart problems. And Steve and his wife have good reason to believe that the likely culprit was the not long ago injection she took to battle the Wu flu. Horrific evil can be caused by one single bureaucrat. That's the backdrop. That's the horizon of reality. God had his reasons for creating, and however we say it, he wanted to share existence with us. He wanted to share beauty with us, wanted to share love with us, personhood with us, wanted us to grow. God designed the formal existence that we now live inside. With that setup, then, why didn't God stop Joseph Stalin? I mean, after all, communist leader Stalin would go on to murder some 60 million people. Maybe God could have young boy Joseph's classmates beat him to death on the Yori village playground so Joseph doesn't grow up to be a monster? well, we can't solve our moral dilemma by having God make children beat to death other children. Immorality can't be the cause to end immorality. God forcing some to do immoral actions is still a violation of free will. And God forcing immorality on human beings also violates God's own holy character, so that doesn't work. Then why didn't God strongly convict young Joseph of his sin or prompt Joseph's relatives to rebuke his impudent, childish actions? Well, Feinberg says we don't know that God didn't do that. Scripture teaches that all people have a God-given conscience, so at some point in his life, most likely, repeatedly and often, Joseph ignored that inner siren. Because conviction of sin doesn't always stop moral evil. And by the way, Stalin is my example, not Feinberg's. Or why didn't God just lobotomize Stalin? Stalin means steel. The area that he came from was a steel-producing area. Why didn't God just lobotomize Stalin? I mean, young Joe could have had a brain bleed when he clonked his head on the playground equipment. Or young man Joe could have had a massive stroke and died when he bonked his head on a way too low doorpost while at seminary in Tiflis. Yes, he attended seminary. And I mean, me? I have no doubt God could visit an evildoer with a life-ending stroke. Well, to answer that, first of all, we're presuming God knows the future. Not all theologians believe he does, but I do. But let's say God knows the future, so he knows when to lobotomize each and every then only precocious young child so that he or she doesn't grow up to become an immoral monster? But doing that at some point, isn't that itself a violation of free will? Or, and the logic of this one is straight out of Compton. I mean, straight out of Feinberg, quote, why doesn't God simply rearrange our world to accomplish his moral goal? End quote. With Stalin, why didn't God keep all the frogs and cats out of young Joseph's life so that he never even considers torturing one of them? Feinberg's answer is spot on to my hypothetical situation. Quote, If people are stubborn and resist God's will, it may take a great deal more rearranging of events and circumstances than we might think. A change that looks beneficial or necessary to us, upon examining the circumstances, might well be a change that disrupts other people's lives. End quote. And then Feinberg rightly notes, none of us lives in isolation. A necessary change to get us to do good might be a change that disrupts someone else's life and perhaps even turns them toward doing evil. God would have to do this for every one of us every time we decide to resist His will or ignore His warnings through our consciences. End quote. So again, should God have removed all the cats in Joseph's Georgian village so that Joseph never had the idea of torturing cats? I have no idea if Stalin tortured animals as a young boy, but it helps us vividly see how cause and effect are messy. And if God kept all the cats out of his life, would that Georgian city then in Stalin's boyhood have been overrun with rats? Would a rat infestation cause other people to endure other possible evil circumstances? Or what about bees? How hard is it to capture a honeybee and roast it with a magnifying glass? Should God have removed all the bees from young Stalin's Georgian county so that Joseph never tortured a single bee, an act which might help him to become later on the monster of Russia? So, where? Just where? Where would we draw the line? Where would we want God to intervene? And building on that, Feinberg wisely clarifies, the fact is that we really don't know what we're asking when we ask God to rearrange circumstances. If God leaves our fundamental capacities as they are, capacities that He created, capacities that He gave us expressly for living life, it isn't clear what He would have to do to rearrange our world so that circumstances would causally incline all of us to do right on every occasion. End quote. Again, getting us to change course may well cause other people's lives and circumstances to change. Could God do that? Does He have the power to do that? I believe mostly yes. But He made decisions at creation that pre-shape how big chunks of this will go. And the Bible shows us in which book? Oh yeah, about 66 of them, that this goes, stemming from our free willing decisions, frequently very, very bad. And then, as we saw last week on natural evil, there's also the effect that miraculously changing circumstances and events would have on us as creatures. Giving us desires, that was risky on God's part. Not risky because He didn't know what would happen, but risky in the sense of what would nevertheless eventuate. But if He didn't give us desires for food, sex, adventure, exploration, art, music, we'd be different finite creatures than what He designed us to be. Amen? Or giving us free wills that frequently get overridden by our immoral desires, James chapter 1, that was risky on God's part. Not risky because He didn't know what would happen, but risky in the sense of what would nevertheless eventuate in space and time. But if He didn't give us free will, we'd be markedly different creatures than what He designed us to be. And apparently, logic dictates, inference dictates, God wanted us to be this kind, but not with sin, this kind of creature. Changing us might make us subhuman, which I'm afraid is what I too often observe from history and today's rampant immorality, subhuman existence. Well, you guys, Feinberg then goes through some other possibilities God might have undertaken to get rid of evil, each with its own problems. First, God could eliminate moral evil by doing away with mankind. But there's way too many objections to embrace that solution.
Not for Mr. Gates.
Or number two, God could eliminate moral evil by eliminating all objects of desire. But to do that, he'd pretty much need to eliminate the whole world. And that's the definition of tossing the baby out with the bathwater. 3. God could eliminate moral evil by erasing all human desires, since sin ultimately stems from desires. But in eliminating our desires, he'd eliminate us. Lacking desires, we wouldn't do anything, and God clearly likes that we do things. 4th, God could eliminate moral evil by giving us desires but never allowing those desires to be overly aroused to where they produce moral evil. So, in short, our desires would be weaker. But again, that would make us pre-programmed to be entirely different beings. If our desires were weakened, would the human race even be able to propagate itself? Or would anything excellent get made? Or would we live in a miserable world where everything was a half-assed quality? Gulp. That's what a socialistic world would be. A world with flattened or weakened desires. Mercy. Well, those are just 4 of his 8 possibilities. I can't take time to note the other 4. Because there's an area with which I disagree with Dr. Feinberg that I believe desperately needs unpacking. A modified Calvinist, Scholar Feinberg believes that all, spelled A-L-L, all suffering works together for God's ultimate plans for the universe. Or put differently, all evil and pain and suffering will eventually be used by God for history's good. And I want to think through this with you both because it's a widespread popular belief and because I believe it can cause further existential damage. Now, first, I do believe evil can be used for good. First, for individuals. Paul says in Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. The Apostle Paul, as he thinks through what it means to belong to the elect, to belong to Christ's bride, the church, the final goal of God's salvific efforts, Paul mentions that God is capable of taking disaster and working it for our good. I've had that happen in my life. You have too. Second, I do believe mass evil can be used for the good of creation. The death of algae and plankton, which was probably not those living things' first choice, the death of all those millions of years ago, today gives us the necessary crude oil to fire up most of the planet's energy needs. Good can come even out of death. Or I believe that God can work through disasters. Good can ensue for the benefit of many, many others through one person's disaster or through a town's disaster, a city's large disaster. But I can't take the time today to unpack how all that might be possible. But I do not like Dr. Feinberg, believe that all evil will ultimately result in the planet or the human race's good. He does, Feinberg does. And Professor Feinberg's understanding of God as pure goodness, the way that he sets it up, demands that all evil, pain, and suffering somehow mysteriously contributes to God's overall plan for creation, for the human race, for the bride of Christ. When we look back on history from the eschaton, we will, the Calvinists assert, see how evil, pain, and suffering help to accomplish God's final plans. And me? Nuh-uh. Instead, I believe there's such a thing as utterly abject, pointless evil. I believe there are little girls being raped all across the earth, the good uptake of which will have been no thing. The oven baking of the Jews? Quite likely zero redeemable uptake. Tsunamis that wipe out 250,000 people back in 2004 in Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. I do not believe at all that that contributes to God's final plans. Because me, I believe in evil that is not at all redeemable. And my soul actually recoils when I hear Christians, theologians evil, assert that all evil contributes to God's glory or God's plans. For starters, doing that discounts the rampant evil endured. It diminishes the unspeakable agony that millions or even one person endured. Right? I mean, if somehow a Middle Eastern Christian young mother's having been raped and then summarily shot in the back of the head is ultimately part of God's plan, then the uptake is, well, then her rape and death is really not so bad. And me? I can't go there with you. I won't go there with you. I cannot dismiss pain and suffering like that. I can't write it off like that, not even through big picture abstract theological framing. Now, will a Christian woman who was raped, murdered, nevertheless rejoice in Christ when she sings in the resurrection eschaton? Absolutely. I'll stand and sing beside her and cry tears of joy. Will her rape, murder have mysteriously contributed to God's ultimate redemption plans? I believe not. There is unredeemable evil. Can God redeem it? Somehow in the mystery of his beauty? Yes. Will he always have? I believe no. There is unredeemable evil. And I believe like that not only for the sake of compassion. I don't want to diminish the agony of the innocent. But I also believe like that for the sake of justice. I don't want to diminish the agony of the innocent or the willful infliction of evil by evildoers, because all of that would be to abort justice. And if there's no justice, there's no hope. And by the way, I said this in my episodes on hell. I believe in hell because I believe in ultimate justice. I believe the very worst of human evils are almost always excused and ignored or unpunished in this life. Hell gives me hope that God will make it right in the end. Or again, there's no need for justice on earth if it'll all be redeemed by God in the afterlife, but that's not even remotely what the Bible teaches. God demands that societies enact justice in the here and now. Those societies that ignore godly justice in the here and the now will be severely judged by Christ himself in the age to come. Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46. So, in my theological worldview, there is evil that is beyond redemption. Satan itself will be thrown into eternal hell. Why? It is beyond redemption. There are horrors, willful horrors that people endure at the agony and the agency of others that I cannot and will not dismiss by saying, "Don't worry, honey. Somehow one day God will show you how he was at work through the horrors of your suffering." Not me. Nope. I resolutely assert that God's ultimate plan will indeed have been finally accomplished despite, but not necessarily through, intense evil and the ensuing agony it produces. I'll never pastorally comfort someone in pithy affirmations. Better to be silent and mourn with those who are mourning. Oh, praise you, Jesus of Nazareth, you man of sorrows, you who knew how to mourn with those who mourn. Help us, Master, to be wired to your frequency to oppose rampant evil. We live for you. Thanks for thinking with me, you guys. Please go now and turn your beautiful God-given brains on, everybody.